Good evening. You are listening to Silent Waves, and we are interrupting our regularly scheduled programming to bring you a developing story of extraordinary severity. This is not a drill, and this is not a scheduled broadcast. What we are about to share with you has been confirmed through multiple independent financial and governmental sources in the last 47 minutes. The United States dollar, the world's primary reserve currency for the better part of a century, is in a state of catastrophic and accelerating collapse. Markets across Asia, which opened hours ago, are in free fall. The DXY dollar index, which measures the dollar's strength against a basket of major currencies, has dropped 61 points in a single trading session, a number so historically unprecedented that we want to be transparent with you. Our analysts initially believed the data feed was corrupted. It was not. We are live and we are staying live. My name is Alex Mercer.
And I'm Sarah Donovan. Alex and I are going to be with you through this, however long this night, and perhaps this morning and the days beyond, requires us to be. Before we go any further into the numbers and the institutional analysis, I want to speak to the people listening right now who are already feeling afraid. You have every right to feel what you're feeling. Your savings accounts, your retirement funds, your grocery budgets, the cost of your rent. These are not abstract policy matters. They are the architecture of your daily life, and right now that architecture is shaking. We are going to keep you informed. We are going to be honest with you, even when the news is difficult. And we are going to stay right here. Let's begin.
To establish a timeline for our listeners, the earliest confirmed signs of what we are now calling a structural collapse began approximately 9 hours ago, when the U.S. Treasury market experienced what bond traders are describing as a buyer's strike. In plain language, that means the buyers who would normally absorb newly issued U.S. government debt, foreign central banks, institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, simply stopped buying. When demand for Treasury bonds evaporates, yields spike, and when yields spike at this speed, it creates a cascading loss of confidence in the currency itself. We're now looking at the 10-year Treasury yield having breached 11%, a level not seen in modern financial history. The Federal Reserve convened an emergency session 2 hours ago. Their statement, which we received approximately 18 minutes ago, reads in part, "The Federal Reserve is monitoring conditions with the full range of its available tools." That language is deliberately vague, and financial analysts at this hour are interpreting it as a sign that the Fed is, in their words, out of conventional runway.
While Alex walks us through the institutional mechanics, I want to paint a picture of what this looks like on the ground right now, tonight, in cities across the United States. We're receiving reports that ATMs in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, and Atlanta are either running dry of cash or have been taken offline by the banks themselves to prevent runs. Lines have formed outside bank branches in multiple major cities, even though those branches closed hours ago. People are simply standing outside them in the dark, waiting. Our field correspondents in Brooklyn tell us that a line outside a Chase branch on Atlantic Avenue stretches nearly 2 city blocks. A similar scene is being reported outside a Wells Fargo in downtown Chicago. These are not protesters. These are ordinary people, parents, retirees, small business owners, who woke up to alerts on their phones that their digital balances have become functionally inaccessible. One woman our team spoke with in Houston said, and I'm quoting her directly, "I have $11,000 in my account and I cannot get $20 out of a machine. My kids need to eat tomorrow."
We are now approximately 2 hours into this live broadcast, and I want to update the picture internationally. When the Asian markets opened at their respective morning hours, they were already reacting to the pre-market data coming out of the United States. The Nikkei in Tokyo dropped 38% before trading was halted by circuit breakers. That is the single largest single-session drop in the exchange's history. The Shanghai Composite triggered its 15% limit down mechanism within the first hour of trading and has been suspended. The South Korean Kospi dropped 22%. The Hong Kong Hang Seng fell 34% before suspension. What is important to understand is that these are not markets reacting to a localized problem. These are markets reacting to the realization that the instrument at the center of global trade, the US dollar, may no longer be functioning as a reliable store of value. Approximately 60% of global foreign exchange reserves and roughly 80% of international commodity contracts are denominated in dollars. When confidence in the dollar fails, it does not fail quietly. It fails everywhere, simultaneously.
We are receiving a significant volume of messages from our listeners, and I want to share some of them with you because I think they capture something the raw data cannot. A listener who identifies herself as Margaret, writing from Indianapolis, says, "My husband and I are both retired. We worked for 40 years. Our pension is tied to municipal bonds. I don't understand everything being said on this broadcast, but I understand enough to know we should be terrified. Please keep talking. You're the only voice we have right now. Margaret, we hear you, and we are not going anywhere." Another message from a listener in Sacramento named Daria. "I run a small restaurant. My supply delivery stopped this morning. My supplier said his distributor stopped accepting payment. I have 40 pounds of chicken in a fridge that I can't turn into food because I can't buy anything else to serve it with. Do I open tomorrow? Does opening even make sense?" Darius, that is one of the most painfully concrete descriptions of what an economic collapse means at the human level. The supply chain, the small business, the family livelihood. And we are going to keep asking those questions as this night continues.
We are 3 hours into this broadcast. I want to update our listeners on the international government response, which is moving rapidly. The European Central Bank has convened an extraordinary emergency meeting in Frankfurt. The ECB president issued a statement 40 minutes ago indicating that European financial institutions are being advised to halt all transactions denominated in US dollars pending a full assessment of counterparty risk. In practical terms, this means that European banks are, at this hour, refusing to process dollar-based payments. The Bank of England has issued a similar advisory. The Bank of Japan has intervened, purchasing yen to prop up its own currency, which has paradoxically strengthened as investors flee to anything that is not the dollar. In China, the People's Bank has convened its own emergency session, and preliminary reports from Beijing suggest that China may announce the suspension of all dollar-denominated trade settlements. If that happens, and we want to be clear that it has not happened yet, it would be the single most consequential economic act by any government in decades. The implications for global commodities markets, particularly oil, would be immediate and severe.
I want to turn now to what is happening at American ports and airports, because this is where the abstract becomes terrifyingly concrete. The Port of Los Angeles, which handles roughly 40% of all U.S. imports, has suspended operations as of 1 hour ago. The Port Authority's statement cited the inability to process international shipping payments and an acute shortage of fuel for port equipment, as fuel distributors are refusing to accept dollar payments without a significant premium. They are calling a currency risk surcharge, in some cases as high as 300% above market rate. The Port of Houston has issued a similar suspension. The Port of New York and New Jersey is operating at what they describe as minimal capacity, which means roughly 15% of normal throughput. What this means for ordinary Americans is that the goods sitting in containers on those ships, electronics, clothing, medicine, food staples, are not moving. They are sitting on water a mile from shore, and they cannot be unloaded because the financial infrastructure to pay for their movement has seized.
At airports, the situation is developing along two parallel tracks. Domestically, major carriers, including 3 of the 4 largest U.S. airlines, have grounded flights or significantly reduced operations due to jet fuel payment disputes. American aviation fuel is primarily purchased through contracts denominated in dollars, and fuel suppliers are demanding immediate payment rather than standard 30-day terms, citing the dollar's instability. Chicago O'Hare, Dallas-Fort Worth, and Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta have each reported significant delays and cancellations. Internationally, the picture is more severe. 14 countries, as of 40 minutes ago, have suspended direct air service to the United States. These include the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Japan, Australia, South Korea, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Singapore, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The stated reason in most cases is the same. Insurance underwriters are refusing to cover flights landing in the United States until currency and political stability can be assessed. The United States is, at this hour, becoming increasingly air isolated.
We are receiving reports now from the medical sector that I want to share carefully because they are among the most alarming we have received. Hospitals across the country are beginning to report critical shortages, not of patients, but of supplies. The pharmaceutical supply chain in the United States is heavily import dependent. Roughly 80% of the active ingredients in American medications are manufactured overseas, primarily in India and China, and those supply chains move on dollar-denominated contracts. We are hearing from hospital administrators in Phoenix, Miami, and Detroit that orders placed in the last 72 hours have been frozen by suppliers demanding payment guarantees that U.S. banks can no longer provide. One hospital administrator in Detroit, who asked that we not identify her institution, told our team, "We have enough insulin for 4 days. We have enough surgical supplies for maybe a week at current usage. After that, I genuinely do not know what we do." 4 days of insulin. I want our listeners to sit with that sentence for a moment.
It is now 4.5 hours into our broadcast, and I need to update the picture on what government officials are calling the social stability situation, which is their clinical language for what is beginning to look like widespread civic disorder. We have confirmed reports of civil unrest in the following cities. In New York City, the commercial district of Midtown Manhattan has seen looting of grocery stores and pharmacies, with NYPD reporting they are overwhelmed and have called for National Guard assistance. In Los Angeles, the Crenshaw and Boyle Heights neighborhoods have seen convenience store and grocery looting, and the LAPD has declared a state of emergency in 3 precincts. In Miami, a Costco warehouse location was breached by several hundred people who removed food and bottled water. No injuries have been reported there, and local police made no arrests, a decision one senior officer described to local media as a matter of judgment given the circumstances. Chicago has seen unrest along the South Side, and the Illinois governor has activated 6,000 National Guard troops, positioning them primarily around the city's food distribution infrastructure. In Houston, there are reports of fuel theft from commercial gas stations where power is still operational.
I want to talk about the children, because in every crisis, it is always the children who are most invisible, and I refuse to let them be invisible here. In the cities where schools are technically still open, and the majority of school districts have not yet made formal closure decisions, teachers are reporting that children are arriving without lunches, without the usual packed bags, with the wide-eyed, silent look that children get when they have overheard too much from the adults around them and understand too little. A teacher in Columbus, Ohio, sent us a message that reads, "I have 26 students in my classroom. Today, 11 of them told me they didn't have breakfast. I gave them what I had in my desk drawer, granola bars, crackers. I have enough for maybe 2 more days. What do I do after that? What do you do after that?" That is the question this crisis is placing in front of every school, every shelter, every food bank, every parent. A food bank director in Philadelphia told our team that their phone lines have been overwhelmed since this morning, and that they have already depleted 40% of their emergency reserves in a single day, as families who have never before needed assistance arrive in numbers they have never seen.
We are now 6 hours into this broadcast, and I want to bring in some macro-level data that has just come across from our financial analysis team. Gold has reached a price of $11,400 per troy ounce, up from approximately $2,100 at yesterday's close. That is a 543% increase in a single day, which in practical terms means that gold has become functionally inaccessible as a hedge for anyone who is not already wealthy. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies initially spiked, but have since experienced their own severe volatility, with Bitcoin dropping from $112,000 to $61,000 in the space of 2 hours, as exchanges struggled with volume and several major crypto platforms suspended withdrawals citing liquidity management. The Swiss franc has emerged as perhaps the primary refuge currency, with the franc strengthening so dramatically against the dollar that the Swiss National Bank, which historically has intervened to weaken the franc, has instead done nothing, apparently accepting that there is nothing it can do. The euro has strengthened significantly, the British pound, the Japanese yen. Every major non-dollar currency is, at this moment, worth substantially more than it was yesterday, because wealth is fleeing the dollar with a desperation that markets have rarely, if ever, witnessed.
We've received a message I want to read in full. It comes from a listener who signs his name simply as Thomas, a truck driver, somewhere on I-70. He writes, "I am sitting in a truck stop in Kansas. I have a full load, 15 tons of canned goods heading for a grocery distribution center in St. Louis. My company called me an hour ago and told me to hold position. The distribution center can't receive the shipment because their payment processing system is down. There are 6 other trucks here, 6 other drivers. We all have food in our trailers that people desperately need, and we cannot legally deliver it because the system that authorizes the delivery is broken. I have a full tank of diesel. When it runs out, I don't know if I'll be able to refuel. I don't know if my fuel card will work. I don't know if I'll get home. I am telling you this because I think people should know that the food exists. It's out here. It's just stuck. Thomas, we are reading your message on air. We want people to know the food exists. It is out here. It is stuck. That is both a tragedy and a testament to exactly how fragile the systems that feed us have become."
7 hours in, and I want to address something that our listeners deserve clarity on. The question of what the United States government is actually doing at this moment in response to this crisis. The President issued a brief televised statement approximately 90 minutes ago. The statement was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. In it, the President declared a national economic emergency under the provisions of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Practically, this authorizes the executive branch to take extraordinary measures regarding financial transactions and international trade. The President announced the following specific actions: a temporary freeze on all non-essential dollar transfers out of the United States, a directive to the Federal Reserve to purchase unlimited quantities of Treasury bonds, what economists call unlimited quantitative easing, and the convening of an emergency G20 summit, which is being organized for 48 hours from now. What is notably absent from the statement is any mention of a specific mechanism to stop the collapse itself. A freeze on capital outflows is a desperate measure. Unlimited QE in a confidence crisis risks accelerating inflation. Several economists we have reached tonight have used the same phrase, independently of one another. They are trying to fill a punctured dam with their hands.
8 hours in, and the human toll is beginning to crystallize in ways that are both individual and systemic. We can now confirm the first deaths directly attributable to the crisis. In Phoenix, Arizona, 3 patients at a dialysis clinic died after the clinic's power supply was cut, when the facility's automatic payment system failed, and the utility company, operating under its own financial strain, did not manually override the disconnect. The clinic's administrator released a statement saying, "We are devastated. We tried every phone number. We tried in person. The system did not bend." In New York City, 2 elderly residents died in separate incidents when their caregivers, paid through digital payment systems that have ceased to function, did not show up for their shifts. This is the shape of what is beginning, not the dramatic, visible catastrophe, but the quiet collapse of the invisible infrastructure of care that keeps the most vulnerable people alive. In Chicago, 1 person was killed in a confrontation at a grocery store as police responded to a looting incident. In Baltimore, 2 people were hospitalized with serious injuries following clashes outside a bank. We are being very careful with these numbers. They are not large, they are growing.
I want to update the international picture as we enter our 9th hour of broadcast. Several countries that hold enormous quantities of US dollar reserves are now facing what economists call a reserve crisis. Japan holds approximately $1,100 billion in US Treasury holdings. China holds approximately $860 billion. These assets, which were designed as the bedrock of financial security for these nations, are now losing value in real terms at a rate that is visible in real time. Japanese finance ministry officials have called an emergency press conference scheduled for 2 hours from now. Brazil, which holds approximately $320 billion in dollar reserves, has already convened an emergency cabinet session. Nigeria, which prices its oil exports primarily in dollars, is facing a severe government revenue crisis that its central bank governor described in a statement as an existential threat to national public services. Egypt is in a similarly acute position. Pakistan, which already had a fragile economy, is now facing the prospect of being unable to pay for essential food and fuel imports. The International Monetary Fund has issued an unprecedented emergency statement acknowledging that it lacks the resources to respond to a crisis of this magnitude. The IMF's capacity is calibrated for national or regional crises, not for a simultaneous collapse of the global reserve currency.
We are now 9 hours into this broadcast, and I want to pause and acknowledge something. For 9 hours, Alex and I have been tracking numbers, statistics, government statements, market indices, and all of it is true and necessary and important. But I want to take a moment, genuinely just a moment, to say that behind every number we have read tonight is a human being who is frightened. The retired couple in Indianapolis who worked 40 years and are watching their savings dissolve. The truck driver on I-70 with 15 tons of food he cannot deliver. The teacher in Columbus with granola bars in her desk drawer. The hospital administrator in Detroit who is counting insulin vials. The woman in Houston who cannot get $20 out of an ATM for her children. These are not abstractions, they are the reality beneath the data. And I want to tell you something else. In the last 9 hours, we have also received messages about neighbors helping neighbors. A listener in Denver says his entire apartment building organized a communal pantry tonight, pooling food so that no one on any floor goes without. A listener in Memphis says her church opened its doors and has 200 people inside right now, sharing what they have. A listener in rural Minnesota says he fired up his generator and ran extension cords to 4 neighboring houses so the elderly residents could keep their heat on. These things are also true. They are also the reality. Do not forget them.
We are 10 hours in. I want to walk through the infrastructure picture comprehensively because it is worsening across every sector. Power. 14 states are reporting partial or complete grid disruptions. The power grid in the United States relies on fuel oil and natural gas, both of which are purchased through contracts that are, at this hour in disputed status. Utility companies in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Indiana have begun implementing rolling blackouts, not because of physical grid failure, but because they cannot confirm payment for fuel deliveries. Energy providers are demanding cash or foreign currency equivalents. The states of Texas and California, both of which have partially deregulated energy markets, are seeing the most acute disruptions, as private providers are the fastest to respond to payment uncertainty. Water. Municipal water systems require constant chemical treatment and pump operation. In 3 cities, Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi, and Newark, New Jersey, water service has degraded to levels that health officials are calling unsafe, in part because chemical suppliers have paused deliveries. This is particularly acute in communities that already had fragile infrastructure. Roads and bridges. The federal highway system depends on continuous maintenance contracts, most of which are tied to quarterly budget allocations that may no longer be executable. Several major interstate bridges have been closed by state authorities, citing the inability to fund emergency structural checks that were already overdue.
12 hours. We are halfway through the first day of this crisis, and I want to take stock of the human geography of who is bearing the heaviest burden. It is not evenly distributed. It never is. The communities that are suffering most acutely right now are those that were already vulnerable before this morning. Rural communities with limited access to food retailers beyond a single grocery store that may now be empty. Urban communities of color that have historically had less access to emergency financial reserves and are more dependent on daily wage work that has evaporated. Elderly populations living alone whose support systems are tethered to digital payment systems that have failed. Immigrant communities who may be undocumented or unbanked, and therefore had no formal safety net to begin with. Disabled Americans whose medical equipment, medications, and in-home care are all dependent on financial systems that have frozen. We've received a message from a listener in rural West Virginia who describes herself as a home health aide. She writes, "I have 8 clients. All of them are elderly. All of them depend on me. My payment card stopped working this morning. I went to work anyway. All 8 houses, my own gas, my own food for them from my own kitchen. I will do this as long as I can. But I need people to know someone is still showing up. She is still showing up. Please know that."
13 hours in, and we now have significantly more detailed numbers on the scope of the unrest. The National Guard has been activated in 31 states. Active duty military personnel have been deployed in a domestic capacity in 6 cities: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Miami, and Baltimore. This is an unusual constitutional situation, as the Posse Comitatus Act generally prohibits the use of federal military forces in domestic law enforcement. But the President's emergency declaration includes a specific provision invoking the Insurrection Act, which provides an exception. Legal scholars we have reached tonight are expressing significant concern about this precedent, but most acknowledge that the immediate public safety calculus is difficult to dispute. In terms of confirmed casualties from unrest-related incidents, we are now tracking 31 deaths across 17 cities, the majority from confrontations over food and fuel. An additional 212 people have been hospitalized with injuries. These numbers are likely undercounted, given that hospitals are themselves operating under severe strain and reporting is fragmented. The situation in Miami is particularly acute. The city's large elderly population and extreme heat are combining to create a secondary medical emergency, and the city's emergency services director has asked for federal disaster declaration assistance.
14 hours in. I want to tell you about a woman named Rosa because our team reached her by phone an hour ago, and her story is this broadcast in miniature. Rosa runs a bakery in San Antonio, Texas. She has operated it for 22 years. She bakes bread. That's it. That's the whole business. Bread. She employs 4 people. This morning, her flour supplier called to say that the shipment she was expecting would not arrive because the supplier could not pay the mill that grinds the grain, because the grain elevator that stores the wheat has suspended operations because the digital payment systems that process the sale of wheat futures, the instrument that allows farmers to be paid before the grain ships, have ceased to function. The chain goes: wheat farmer, grain elevator, mill, flour distributor, bakery. Every link in that chain requires dollar-denominated digital payment. When the payments freeze, the bread stops. Rosa baked through her remaining flour today. She made every loaf she could. She priced them at cost and opened her doors this afternoon and was sold out within 40 minutes. She told our producer, "I don't know when I'll bake again. I told my employees not to come in tomorrow. I don't know what to tell them after that." Rosa has been baking bread in San Antonio for 22 years, and tonight she doesn't know if she'll ever do it again.
15 hours. We're getting substantial incoming data from international sources, and the picture is worsening significantly on the global stage. Several countries are now experiencing their own secondary crises directly triggered by the dollar collapse. In Argentina, which has a long history of currency instability and already had significant dollar exposure, the government has declared a state of economic emergency and suspended all bank withdrawals, a measure locals call a corralito, which they experienced devastatingly in 2001. In Turkey, the lira, already weakened, has dropped an additional 40% against the euro in the last 6 hours, triggering food panic buying in Ankara and Istanbul. In Egypt, the government relies heavily on dollar-denominated fuel imports to run power plants, and Egyptian authorities have confirmed rolling blackouts in Cairo affecting millions of residents. In sub-Saharan Africa, the humanitarian consequences are already severe. Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria all hold substantial dollar-denominated debt, and the effective doubling or tripling of their repayment obligations in local currency terms has created instant government insolvency scenarios. The UN Secretary General issued a statement an hour ago describing the situation as a humanitarian catastrophe of a magnitude that our systems were not designed to address simultaneously across so many nations. The death toll globally, which we must report is deeply uncertain given the fragmentary nature of data, is being estimated by the UN at somewhere between 400 and 800 people, with the caveat that this number is certainly undercounting the crisis in regions with poor reporting.
We have been on air for 16 hours now, and I want to acknowledge something both Alex and I are feeling, something I suspect many of you listening are also feeling. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical tiredness, but from sustained emotional exposure to suffering at scale. It is the exhaustion of witnessing. We have a responsibility to continue witnessing, and we will. But I also want to say, if you're listening to this and you need to step away, if you need to hold your children or walk outside into the night air or eat something or cry, that is not weakness. That is humanity. Please take care of yourselves as we continue. Now let me tell you about something that is, in the middle of all of this, extraordinary. In Philadelphia, a network of mutual aid organizations that has been quietly operating for years, building food distribution, neighborhood care, and emergency communication systems, has become the city's most effective emergency response. They have more accurate information about neighborhood needs than the city government. They have active distribution chains moving food to seniors, to families with young children, to people with disabilities right now, tonight, organized entirely through volunteer coordination. A city official in Philadelphia told our producer, "If not for them, I don't know what we would be telling people to do." Civil society doing what governments in crisis cannot.
At 17 hours, let me address what is happening to the dollar itself in technical terms, because it matters to understanding what comes next. The dollar's collapse is not happening in a vacuum. It is interacting with the system that were built upon the dollar in ways that create feedback loops. Here is the mechanism. When confidence in the dollar falls, holders of dollar-denominated assets sell them. When they sell them, the dollar falls further. When it falls further, more holders sell. This is called a doom loop, or death spiral in financial terminology. And the critical question that every central bank and finance ministry is trying to answer tonight is, where does it stop? Is there a floor? The answer, under normal conditions, would be yes. Eventually the dollar becomes cheap enough relative to other currencies that buying resumes. But the current conditions are not normal. The floor hypothesis requires that buyers trust the dollar will retain some value. If that trust is gone entirely, if the dollar loses its status as a store of value in the minds of global market participants, then there may not be a conventional floor. We are in territory that has not been mapped. The closest historical parallel economists cite is the collapse of the Weimar Republic's German mark in 1923, when hyperinflation destroyed a currency entirely. Most economists tonight are reluctant to commit to that analogy, but they are not dismissing it.
18 hours. I want to read from a cluster of messages we received in the last 2 hours from listeners who describe themselves as being in difficult circumstances, because I think the range of experience is important for people to hear. From James in rural Kentucky. No power since hour 12. Running on generator. Have enough fuel for 2 days. My wife is diabetic. Insulin is fine for now. I'm watching the stars and listening to you on battery radio. The sky looks the same as it always does. I find that very comforting. James, the sky looks the same. From Amara in Minneapolis. I am a first-generation immigrant. I came here with nothing and built something. Tonight, watching what is happening, I am not afraid. I have survived worse. I know how to live without systems. I want people to know you can do this. Humans are resilient. We have done this before. Amara, thank you. From a listener who signs off simply as a nurse in Denver. I have been awake for 26 hours. I will not leave my patients. I want my family to know I love them. Tell them if you can. If there is someone listening whose nurse or doctor or healthcare worker is in Denver tonight, that message was for you. From Henry in rural Georgia. I have a garden. I have canned food. I have a well. My neighbors don't. I opened my fence this morning. Come get what you need. Henry in rural Georgia has opened his fence.
19 hours in, and the governmental response is entering a second phase. The president signed an executive order 1 hour ago establishing what is being called the National Economic Continuity Framework, a wartime-style economic management structure that has not been used in any form since World War II. Under this framework, all major banks are being placed under partial federal oversight for the purpose of ensuring minimum essential services, ATM cash availability, payroll processing, and medical payment clearance. The Federal Reserve has formally announced unlimited bond purchasing, essentially committing to print money without limit to backstop Treasury markets. The Department of Defense has been directed to assist in food and medicine distribution logistics in what are being termed critical supply gap zones. The FEMA administrator held a press conference 30 minutes ago and named 23 metropolitan areas as federal disaster zones under an emergency economic disaster declaration, a category that has never previously been invoked. The 23 cities include New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia, San Antonio, Dallas, San Diego, Jacksonville, Austin, Fort Worth, Columbus, Charlotte, Indianapolis, San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, Nashville, El Paso, Memphis, Louisville, and Boston. Every major American metropolitan area is, as of now, a federal disaster zone.
We are 20 hours in. The world is changing as we speak. I want to take a panoramic look at what is happening globally because the human picture in other countries is deeply important and is not getting enough attention in the American broadcast. In Bangladesh, which is one of the world's largest garment-producing nations, the garment industry, which operates on dollar-denominated contracts with American and European retailers, has effectively shut down overnight. Factories in Dhaka have closed. Millions of workers, the vast majority of them women, have been told not to come in until further notice. These are workers who live paycheck to paycheck, in many cases daily wage to daily wage. An advocacy organization working with Bangladeshi garment workers issued a statement saying that their hotlines have been flooded with calls from women asking how they are going to feed their families tonight. In India, the technology sector, which is heavily tied to American corporate contracts, is watching its revenue streams evaporate in real time as U.S. companies freeze discretionary spending. In Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, countries that have relied on export trade denominated in dollars to lift tens of millions of people out of poverty in the last 2 decades, the reversal of that progress is beginning in a single day. The globalization of prosperity was built on the dollar. The collapse of the dollar is the collapse of the globalization of prosperity.
21 hours in. I want to give our listeners a frank assessment of where we stand on the key metrics that determine what comes next. The dollar index, last confirmed reading 40 minutes ago, down 73% from yesterday's close. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, which had circuit breakers triggered repeatedly, and trading was eventually suspended. Last confirmed value was approximately 11,400 points, down from approximately 43,000 at the previous close. That is a 73% decline. The S&P 500 suspended with a similar magnitude of decline. The unemployment rate, which was 3.7% as of the most recent report, is now being projected by economic modeling firms to reach somewhere between 28 and 42% within 30 days if the current trajectory continues. That would exceed the Great Depression peak of 25% unemployment in 1933. Mortgage payments. Approximately 36 million American households hold mortgages. The vast majority of those mortgages are serviced through automated digital payment systems. As of this hour, the systems processing those payments are operating at approximately 20% of normal function. Millions of mortgage payments that were due today did not process. What the legal and contractual consequences of that will be remains entirely unclear and is the subject of emergency review by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
22 hours. I want to share something that I have been sitting with for the last several hours because I think it needs to be said plainly. In every hour of this broadcast, we have reported things that seemed unimaginable the hour before. When we started, the news was that markets were crashing. 2 hours in, we reported ATM lines, then looting, then deaths, then hospital supply shortages, then power outages, then international flight suspensions, then National Guard deployments, then military in the streets, then federal disaster zone declarations, then factory closures in Bangladesh. Each development has been larger and more consequential than the one before it. And I want to say honestly, I don't know what the next hour will bring. None of us do. What I can tell you is that humans have faced the collapse of the systems they built before. Not in this form, not at this speed, not at this scale, but the capacity for communities to survive, to reorganize, to find one another, to share what they have, to care for the most vulnerable. That capacity is not a function of the financial system. It is a function of who we are. And tonight, I have seen evidence of that capacity in every message we have received from every corner of this country.
At 23 hours, I have to report a significant development in the international diplomatic sphere. China has formally announced what it is calling the Emergency Global Trade Stabilization Initiative. In practical terms, China is proposing to replace the dollar as the unit of account for international trade with a basket of currencies it calls the Global Trade Unit, anchored partially to the Chinese yuan and partially to a basket of commodities, including gold, oil, and agricultural products. This proposal, which would have been dismissed as geopolitical fantasy 24 hours ago, is being received with unexpected seriousness by a number of nations. Preliminary reports indicate that Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and approximately 15 other nations have expressed openness to the proposal in principle. The European Union has said it is willing to consider all mechanisms for trade stabilization. The significance of this cannot be overstated. If the dollar is replaced as the global reserve currency, even partially, even temporarily, the consequences for the United States economy are generational. The United States has benefited enormously from what economists call exorbitant privilege, the ability to borrow cheaply, to run large deficits, and to conduct foreign policy from a position of financial strength because the world needs dollars. If that ends, the structural position of the United States in the world changes permanently.
23 and a half hours. I want to close with the voices of our listeners because they are what this broadcast has truly been. From a retired school teacher in Oregon named Patricia, I am 81 years old. I have lived through the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, the assassination of President Kennedy, 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic. Every time we were told it was the end. Every time, it was not the end. I am old enough to know that I don't know the outcome of this, but I am also old enough to know that humans are extraordinarily difficult to finish. Patricia, you have earned the right to say that. From a firefighter in Cleveland named Marcus, I went to work this morning because I go to work. I will go to work tomorrow because that's what I do. My job doesn't change based on what the dollar is doing. The fires still need to be put out. From a mother in Seattle named Jennifer, my daughter is 7. She asked me tonight if everything is going to be okay. I told her yes. I hope I'm right. I'm going to keep telling her yes. Jennifer, keep telling her yes. From a college student in Austin named Kwame, I have $400 in my account that I can't access and 6 months left in my degree. I am going to finish this degree, whatever it takes. I am going to finish it. Kwame, finish the degree.
We are now at 24 hours. The first full day of this crisis is complete, and I want to give our listeners the fullest, most accurate accounting we can of where we stand and where things appear to be heading. At the 24-hour mark, here is what the data shows. The US dollar has lost approximately 75% of its purchasing power against a basket of major currencies. It has not ceased to function entirely. Transactions in dollars are still technically possible in some domestic contexts. But it has effectively ceased to function as a credible store of value or as a reliable instrument for international trade. The Federal Reserve's unlimited bond purchasing program has injected what analysts estimate to be $12 trillion in new liquidity into the system in the last 8 hours. Preliminary indications suggest this has slowed, but not reversed, the collapse. The Treasury market is partially functional. There are buyers again, but they are buying at yields that imply a deeply diminished faith in U.S. fiscal stability. Confirmed global deaths directly attributable to this crisis in its first 24 hours. 4,312 people. The breakdown, approximately 1,800 in the United States, from causes including civil unrest, medical care collapse, heat-related illness in communities without power, and transportation accidents during evacuation attempts. Approximately 2,500 internationally, concentrated in economically vulnerable nations, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, and Venezuela. These are confirmed numbers. The real number is certainly higher.
In the United States, the population that remains functional and intact is still the vast majority. Approximately 320 million Americans are alive and physically present in their communities. But the proportion of that population with access to functioning financial services, reliable food supply, continuous power, and operational medical care has dropped precipitously in 24 hours. Our best estimate from the data available is that roughly 60% of the American population currently has reliable access to all four of those things. The remaining 40%, approximately 130 million people, are experiencing at least one significant gap: no reliable access to banking, or food insecurity, or power disruption, or medical supply shortage. That is not a nation in total collapse, but it is a nation in serious, acute, and worsening crisis. The infrastructure that remains intact, the electrical grid, is functioning at approximately 65% of normal capacity nationally, with severe regional variations. Interstate highways are largely passable but experiencing significant freight disruption. The internet and cellular communication networks are functional in most areas, though stressed. Emergency services, fire, police, ambulance, are operational but severely strained in major urban areas.
Now I want to address the question that every listener is asking. What happens next? What does the resolution or the continuation of this crisis look like? Here is the most honest assessment we can give you based on everything we have reported in the last 24 hours. The dollar will not recover to its pre-crisis value. That is the near unanimous assessment of every economist we have been able to reach. What is less certain is whether it will stabilize at some diminished level or continue to collapse entirely. The Federal Reserve's intervention has created a fragile pause. There are signs, tentative, early, and uncertain, that some international buyers are returning to Treasury markets at these higher yields. This is the critical variable. If Treasury bond buyers return in sufficient numbers to fund U.S. government operations, even at significantly higher interest costs, then the U.S. government can continue to function. It will be a poorer, more constrained United States, but a functioning one. If they do not return, if the confidence collapse proves irreversible, then what follows is a hyperinflationary scenario in which the Fed's money printing accelerates the dollar's decline rather than arresting it. In that scenario, the consequences for ordinary Americans would extend for years, potentially decades.
The world that exists at the end of this first day is a different world than the one that existed at the beginning. For the countries most severely affected by this crisis, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, Venezuela, Argentina, the consequences are already deeply embedded in their societies. Food insecurity has spiked in all of them. Government revenue has collapsed. Social services are suspended or severely curtailed. In Pakistan, which was already facing food shortages before this crisis, emergency UN aid convoys have been requested and are being organized, but the logistical capacity to deliver that aid is itself compromised by the same dollar-denominated systems that have broken down everywhere else. Humanitarian organizations are calling this a compounded crisis, a crisis occurring on top of pre-existing crises, in a world whose crisis response infrastructure has itself been damaged by the same event. And yet there are the people in these countries too, doing what the woman in rural Georgia did, opening their fences, organizing mutual aid, sharing what they have. In Lagos, Nigeria, neighborhood councils that have operated for decades outside formal systems have become the primary providers of community support. In Karachi, Pakistan, mosque networks are organizing food distribution. In Cairo, apartment buildings are pooling resources and checking on elderly neighbors. This happens everywhere humans are. This is what humans do.
Let me give our listeners the definitive picture of where this crisis has arrived at the close of its first 24 hours, and what the trajectory suggests for the days ahead. The global financial system has not collapsed entirely. What it has done is undergone a tectonic restructuring in a single day. The dollar remains technically in use, but has lost its status as an unchallenged global reserve currency. China's proposed global trade unit framework is gaining real traction, and it is likely that within the next 30 to 90 days, a significant portion of global trade will begin to move to non-dollar settlement mechanisms. This represents the end of an era, the era of dollar hegemony that began at Bretton Woods in 1944. For the United States, the consequences are permanent and profound. Higher borrowing costs, reduced geopolitical influence, and a standard of living adjustment that will be painful and generational. The United States is not destroyed. Its cities stand. Its people are alive, the overwhelming majority of them. Its institutions, battered, discredited, and under enormous strain, remain nominally functional. But the United States that existed yesterday morning is gone, and the nation that emerges from this crisis will bear the marks of this day for the rest of its history.
Confirmed global death toll at the 24-hour mark, 4,312. That number will rise. The deaths that will follow in the coming days and weeks. From medical supply failures, from food insecurity, from the secondary consequences of collapsing public health infrastructure will likely bring the total death toll from this crisis into the tens of thousands globally before it stabilizes. The most vulnerable populations will bear the heaviest burden, as they always do. Countries with the least institutional resilience will suffer longest. Communities within wealthy nations that were already marginalized will face the steepest climb back. But the world has not ended. Let us be precise about that. The world has not ended. What has ended is a particular arrangement of the world. A financial architecture that was built over decades and has now, in the space of hours, been fundamentally broken. The arrangement that replaces it will take years to construct. It will be built in the midst of hardship. It will be imperfect. It will be contested. But it will be built because humans build things. That is what we do.
Humanity did not collapse in these 24 hours. The global financial system was severely damaged and permanently altered. The United States entered a prolonged period of economic contraction and diminished global influence that will define the next generation. Approximately 40% of Americans faced immediate disruption to at least one essential service. Global trade contracted sharply and began a slow, painful reorganization away from dollar-centric mechanisms. The international death toll climbed and will continue to climb. But governments, however imperfectly, continued to function. Emergency services continued to respond. Hospitals continued to treat. Teachers continued to teach, with granola bars in their desk drawers. Nurses stayed through their 26th hour. Truck drivers sat on I-70 with 15 tons of food, waiting for the system to allow them to deliver it. The system will not fully recover to what it was. But something that is not nothing, has been held together. And holding something together in the middle of its breaking is where courage begins.
We have been on the air for 24 hours. Alex Mercer and I will continue to bring you updates as this story develops, and it will develop for a long time. But I want to close this first day with what I believe to be the most important thing we have learned in all these hours of reporting. The things that held in this crisis were not the things we thought would hold, not the banks, not the payment systems, not the ATMs, not the supply chains. What held was quieter and older and less visible. The teacher with the granola bars, the nurse who would not leave, the firefighter who went to work because that is what he does. Henry in rural Georgia who opened his fence, the mutual aid networks in Philadelphia, the apartment building in Denver with the shared pantry, the woman in West Virginia who drove to all 8 of her clients on her own gas with food from her own kitchen. These things held because they were never attached to the dollar in the first place. They were attached to something else, to something harder to price and harder to destroy. I don't know what you call it. I think you probably know. This is Sarah Donovan, and this is Silent Waves, and we are staying on the air.
This is Alex Mercer. Silent Waves is live, and we will remain live. Stay with us.